Welcome back to Rewitched, a charmed 1998 rewatch journey. I'm your host, Jess Sabanko, and I can't wait to share my thoughts on one of my favorite shows with you. Though episodes are now shorter, I will still be keeping them spoiler-free and welcome fans new and old to join me on my journey here and on social media at Rewitched_pod on Instagram and TikTok. Currently, I'm on season 5. So this week we have season 5, episode 2, Witch's Tale part 2. So this episode, there's no innocent of the week. Instead, we sort of have Phoebe in that role as she is being targeted by our monster of the week, who is Necron, who we were introduced to last episode when he was after the sea hag, and now that'll shift to Phoebe and her immortality as like being his goals to gain. To go through the sisters, I'm going to start with Paige. So for Paige, this episode, she's really struggling with two things. The first is kind of trying to put the family back together. Like we saw at much of the end of last season, Paige's responsibility has really become to like put up with and fix everything that's going on with Piper and Phoebe, who are both going through big emotional struggles in this episode. But to quickly go through Paige's other storyline, she is obviously keeping her job as a social worker, which she was promoted to last episode, but really having a hard time with the balance between her duties as a charmed one and her professional duties. So we see her struggling with finding time to work on this adoption case she's supposed to be working on. Luckily, Cole does step in and get that all sorted out, though he does use magic to do that, which, he doesn't have to worry about personal gain because he's a demon, but that did happen. And we see that as they're interacting, he's trying to convince Paige that he's good, just like he was trying to do with Daryl last episode. And we see both of them telling him to basically just stay away from Phoebe and give up and leave town, which he's almost convinced to do. And I will come back to that later. As for Paige and her career, she does make a big decision at the end of the episode, where she decides that she's going to step away from social work, quit her job, and focus on being a charmed one, which I think it's a really smart decision for her. It does make me sad because she is very good at her job and it's obvious that she does care. But like she says, she is kind of splitting her time and not giving the full attention to such an important job where like people really do need her and rely on her. And, when she's putting all of her focus into helping people as a charmed one, even she says to her boss, like, I'm going to keep helping people just in a different way. Like, I can't keep splitting myself. And it makes sense to me. Like, it makes me sad. And I hope that one day Paige will be able to return to this or maybe grow as a white lighter in a way that would allow her to do that. But looks like for the time being, Paige's journey as a social worker is over. So then in terms of Phoebe's storyline for this episode, so Phoebe's still a mermaid and she opens up the episode just loving life, collecting shells, really cutesy. And then she goes to the cavern and as she's collecting the shells, she runs into Necron, who then wants her immortality. She does manage to get away but is injured. Because of the injury, she is then unconscious, captured by fishermen. There are some really gross comments about them like wanting to kill and sell her body, which is, I don't even want to get into the grossness of like men and selling her. And I'm just going to skip over that because it's just too disgusting to even cover in such a short recap. But I know that I could say much more there. So then we have Necron showing up to save the day in a way because he does, stop that travesty, though he's only doing that because he also wants to kill her, but for different reasons. So he turns them all to dust and then starts attacking Phoebe. He's like, oh, poor mermaids, you're so defenseless. Again, this idea that women could be defenseless in that situation. But then she does kind of like kick his ass, call for Leo. They get out of there, but obviously that situation's not done. Then we go to the manor where we see that Piper is still struggling with her panic and all of that going on. She, earlier in the episode, was informed that Cole is back, which causes a major panic attack for her and this worry that he's going to steal her baby, which is very logical, but with what Piper's going through mentally, obviously she's not thinking as clearly or as logically as she normally might. So we see, Leo and Paige arguing because Leo's like, oh, you should have told me. And Paige is like, oh, well, it was a thing with my sister. White lighter on white lighter beef happening there. Then we see that as Paige is trying to do research into mermaids, Piper is struggling very hard. Leo tries to have a conversation with her. He encourages her to release her fears, which she, of course, interprets to do a fearless spell, which obviously is not something Piper would normally do. But again, her mental state, her mental health is not in a great place right now. So she does cast this spell. And when Phoebe arrives home, we see Piper is now in this black, badass, leather pants outfit, and she no longer gives a fuck about anything. She's like, let's go get this demon. Let's do it all. And they're like, Piper, what happened? And eventually they do catch on to what she's done. And as they're kind of figuring out what to do next, Phoebe just wants to go back to the water. And they're like, no, you have to stay here. So they put her in the bathtub. While she's in the bathtub, we see that the sisters are doing more research into skeletal beings as Piper is working on these really dangerous vanquishing potions, mixing things she shouldn't and causing huge explosions in the attic. Paige is kind of like, no, Piper, why would you do this? This is terrible. But Piper's like, come on, let's just have fun. Then we see the doorbell ring and she lets this interviewer who's there to talk to Phoebe in, tells her to do the interview in the bathtub because people will think she's brave and confident and all this stuff. So Phoebe's just yapping on about fish while Piper's listening through the door. Then we see Paige and Leo come down and they're kind of like, Piper, you're risking exposure. Why the fuck would you do this? And she's like, I covered her tail. It's not that big of a deal. So again, Piper being very not Piper here. Then we have, as they go into the bathroom to kind of interrupt the interview and get things to wrap up, the interviewer does ask Phoebe why her column has been so love-focused. And if there's a guy in her life, and she says no, and she doesn't know. And she kind of looks away, but we see that Paige gains some understanding there. And that's when they finally do kick the interviewer out. And then, just then, perfect timing, Necron arrives. Piper tells Paige to take care of Phoebe. She'll fight with Necron. She tries to blow him up, doesn't work. Then he teleports behind her and kidnaps her. So then we have Phoebe and Paige up in the attic with Leo. Paige is working on a power of 3 spell because she thinks that's the only way they can get rid of Necron because he's a skeletal being, which means that he's between life and death. And obviously he wants Phoebe's immortality so that he can have life. And that the last 2 witches who vanquished skeletal beings did end up dying in the process, so she thinks that the power of 3 spell is their only way of doing this. And then Leo's kind of like, well, it's more like the power of 2.5 because Phoebe's a mermaid and whatever. So Paige asks to talk to him alone. That's when Phoebe's kind of like, this is why I want to be in the sea. There are no secrets there. Everything's open. So seeing a little bit more of Phoebe really just disconnecting from her life, not liking hiding things, maybe relating back to Cole and all the secrets he had last season. Who knows? So then we go out into the hall where Paige reveals that she thinks Phoebe still loves Cole and that's what she's running away from. And maybe when Leo suggested earlier in the episode that Cole was the key to getting Phoebe back, that he was right. But Leo's like, no, it's too late for that. We have to focus on saving Piper, even if it means losing Phoebe. Paige isn't really willing to accept that, but she pretends to agree. They go upstairs. Phoebe's kind of like, what were you guys talking about? And she says, well, we were saying how once we save Piper, you're just going to leave, are you? And Phoebe just kind of shrugs. So yeah, she is. And then as they're about to orb to go to the beach, Paige lets go of the orb just like Piper did last episode and goes to see Cole. Her and Cole have this conversation where Cole is calling back to their earlier conversation at Paige's office where she was saying that the reason Phoebe turned into a mermaid is because she hates him and needs to escape him in order to have a better life. And he's like, I'm doing exactly what you asked. And she brings up how she thinks she was wrong and that Phoebe's actually running away because she loves him, that all of her columns have been about love and that he can save her. And Cole's like, well, the only one who can prove that to me is Phoebe, and she's not capable of that. So Paige does a spell to open Phoebe's heart and show Cole how she feels about him and is like, wow, I guess she loves you more than either of us realized. Then Paige leaves, and when we get to the beach, we see that they're both like, oh, why is Paige not here? And We find out that then, which we saw a little previously, Necron has been torturing Piper. He has her chained up in the cavern. He's dipping her into water. He's electrocuting her. And because she's, again, fearless, she's being really sassy, not giving a fuck about what he's doing. But obviously he is hurting her, and Leo senses that. So Phoebe decides to just go there and not wait for Paige. When Phoebe arrives, we see that she's like, oh, like, you want me, not her, let her go. Necron throws Piper across the place and is kind of like, no, this is my fucking decision. And she gets injured and it cuts her stomach. And that's when she's kind of like, comes back to herself. She's like, my baby, like she's freaking out. Then Necron orbs the shell that sucks immortality out onto Phoebe's chest. She's like dying. That's when Leo and Paige arrive and they start fighting. Leo gets knocked out very quickly. Paige is eventually able to orb the shell onto Necron, and then they all hold hands, say the vanquishing spell. He vanquishes, but as he's blowing up, everyone goes flying. Phoebe gets kind of knocked into the water. Paige gets knocked out. Piper gets dragged into the water because her ankle is still attached to the thing she was chained to. She's drowning. Then Phoebe comes to. She like wakes up Paige and Leo. They're like, oh my God, where's Piper? Down below the water, we see Piper having this really beautiful moment with Patty, who's appeared to her in a vision. And Patty basically tells her to have faith in her destiny and that her destiny isn't to leave her baby the way that Patty left her. It's this really sad, like heartbreaking moment. Then Phoebe pulls Piper out of the water, but we see Patty dragging her up in Piper's vision. Piper comes to, and Leo's about to heal her when the baby heals her. So the baby has powers in the womb. Then we see that Piper tells them about what happened with Patty and her vision. And Leo says, things will be different with you because you have something she didn't have, me. And Paige says, and me. And then we look over and see Phoebe's gone, and she says, but not her. And oh, it's so sad. Then we cut to the beach where Cole summons Phoebe, who at first is like, no, like, I don't want this, leave me alone. He does get her to confess her feelings for him, and we see that she does still love him, and she always will, as she says, but that they can't be together, that it's over. And this comes after him basically telling her that she has to like let go of these negative feelings and not turn cold-hearted, and that, you know, basically, even if it's not with him, like she has to open herself up again. And it's this really sweet moment between the two of them, but also this moment where it does feel very over. And I do feel this sense of like sadness for Cole, because it does seem like he is trying and he did do a lot of the right things in this episode. He was going to leave if that was right for her, but we'll see how this storyline continues between the two of them. So then we go back to the manor where we have Phoebe's final scene of the episode right after Paige's quitting scene, where she signs her divorce papers, puts down the picture of her and Cole, letting go of her past, finding her future, being able to move on finally from this toxic relationship, at least for the time being. Then we have our final scene of the episode where Piper is once again looking at her baby book. She takes a picture of her and Patty out of it, puts it into her baby's baby book, and then we see Patty's handwriting appear that says Grandma and Mommy. And it made me fucking cry because it was such a beautiful end to the episode. And I'm just like, I'm loving season 5. I'm loving this second like part to the season opener. And I cannot wait to see where things are going for the sisters. I'm wondering what's happening next with Paige focusing solely on being a charmed one. I'm wondering what's going to happen with Phoebe professionally, personally, now that she is divorced, and how this parental journey is going to continue for Piper and for Leo as they continue on with these steps towards becoming parents and finally kind of like seeing what's going on with their baby magically. And then for Cole, I mean, God only knows where it's going that way. See you back next week.